She Googled my name, right at the dinner table. 5 seconds later, my family realized I wasn't a nobody. I was the writer they'd never bothered to ask about. Hey there, and welcome to today's story. Wherever you are right now, walking, working, maybe just lying back with your headphones, I invite you to take a breath and settle in, because what you're about to hear might feel a little too familiar. Have you ever felt overlooked by the people who were supposed to see you first? In today's story, we meet someone who's been invisible for most of her life, until one moment changes everything. A single question at a dinner table, a phone search, and decades of silence begin to crack. Stick around to see how she finds her voice without ever needing to raise it. And if stories like this speak to something in you, please consider subscribing. It's what keeps these stories coming, and it means the world to me. Let's begin.
I've always said the Dawson family had two kinds of members, the ones in the picture frames and the one behind the camera. My name is Claire Dawson, and I was never in the frame, even when I was. There's a wall in my parents' hallway running from the front door to the kitchen. Dozens of portraits. Ryan in his baseball uniform, Ryan at his high school graduation, Ryan with the mayor after some youth leadership award. In the bottom corner, near the floor, is one photo of me at age 9, smiling crookedly with a missing front tooth. My mother once told a neighbor it was just there for symmetry. That about sums it up. It's funny how families can look perfect from the outside. Colonial house, hydrangeas trimmed with military precision, glass-doored china cabinet no one ever touched. But inside, it was a stage, a set, a place where everything had to be presentable. My mother, Elaine, treated dinner parties like Broadway productions. My father, Frank, played the role of peacekeeper with the emotional range of a porch swing. And then there was Ryan, my older brother. He was the star, the valedictorian, the rising star in corporate law. If there was a conversation, it was about Ryan. If there was silence, it was because Ryan wasn't there yet. Me? I learned early how to fold myself small, how to laugh at the right moments, how to disappear in a room full of people I was related to. But here's the thing no one tells you about being invisible for long enough. You start to see everything. All the cracks in the perfection, the lies told to keep appearances intact, the truth of who people really are when they think you're not worth noticing. And I noticed everything. That's how I became a writer. Not the kind who journals quietly with a sad cup of tea, though God knows I've had my share of both. No, I wrote with teeth, with questions, with fury that got reshaped into fiction and sold in hardback. But they didn't know that. My family had no idea. Not until that night. The night everything they'd ignored finally spoke for itself, with a voice they couldn't talk over. I left for New York with 2 suitcases, a dying laptop, and a journal full of half-finished stories. No one stood at the driveway to wave goodbye. My mother had given me a stiff pat on the shoulder the night choke, reminded me to be realistic, which was her version of affection. My father had nodded vaguely and said something about parking being a nightmare in Brooklyn. That was it. I moved into a shoebox apartment in Bushwick with 2 other women I found on Craigslist, an aspiring chef named Maddie and a visual artist named Tori who painted women with teeth for eyes. Rent was brutal. The walls were thin, the radiator wheezed like a dying goat every night. But for the first time in my life, I had space to fail, or succeed, or just be. During the day, I poured overpriced oat milk lattes for yoga moms and tech bros at a cafe near Union Square. At night, I wrote and wrote and wrote. I devoured rejection letters like vitamins. I sent stories to literary magazines no one outside of MFA programs had ever heard of. I scribbled notes on napkins, grocery receipts, bus tickets. I carried a notebook everywhere like it was a weapon. I didn't tell my family any of this. When they called, well, when Elaine called, my father rarely did, I told them I was doing editorial work or assisting with a publishing team, which wasn't technically a lie. I did edit things. just not for them to read. The truth was, I was ghostwriting speeches for minor city council candidates and blog posts for a tech company that thought blockchain could cure loneliness. I was broke, underfed, and exhausted, and I was happier than I'd ever been. 2 years in, I got my first break. A small literary magazine published one of my short stories under my full name, Claire Eloan Dowson. It was called Winter at Her Back and followed a girl who leaves home without telling anyone and builds a life out of stolen coffee mugs and overdue library books. It got shared, first in circles I'd never expected. Twitter threads, Reddit subs, even a quote reposted by an Instagram poetry account with 400K followers. An agent reached out, then another. I picked the one who didn't call me kiddo. By the time I turned 28, my first book was out, Ink Between the Silence, a collection of interconnected stories about women navigating the quiet violence of family life, was small press, low budget, but earned a cult following. It was featured in The Atlantic and optioned for adaptation by an indie production company in Toronto. I didn't tell my parents. Not out of bitterness, out of habit. I had stopped trying to share good news with them after my freshman year of college, when I called to say I'd won a regional fiction prize, and my mother replied, "Well, that's sweet. Ryan just closed a bachelor's 300K deal at his internship." The silence I felt then was louder than any applause I'd ever get. So I learned to live in compartments. My New York life, book readings, press interviews, long nights editing in my studio apartment was vivid and full of color. My Ohio life, 2 phone calls a month, a Christmas visit where I was seated next to the family dog, was beige and echoing. They had no idea that my second book, Feral Grace, was being used in college curriculums, or that I had a New York Times review tacked to my fridge, or that I had a quote tattooed down my spine from a letter one of my readers sent me. No, what they did know was that Claire worked in publishing and liked books. That was it. I sometimes wondered what they thought I did in New York. Shelve books? Staple manuscripts? My mother once asked if I'd ever considered teaching creative writing to children because, in her words, that seems more stable than whatever it is you're doing. Meanwhile, I was on a panel at Columbia discussing the evolution of trauma narratives in postmodern literature. But I never corrected her. I never tried to explain. Why? Because I knew what she'd hear. Claire's hobby is doing well. She wouldn't see the years, the rejections, the pressure of producing under deadlines, the imposter syndrome that whispered in my ear even when I held a signed publishing contract in my hand. The thing is, you can only keep explaining your worth to people for so long before you forget why you're trying. And yet, despite everything, I kept visiting. Twice a year, Thanksgiving and either Christmas or Easter, I flew back to Ohio, stepped into the Dawson household, and reverted to the role I'd been assigned. The quiet one, the weird one, the one who lives far away doing something with books. They would fuss over Ryan's latest client acquisition, or his new Tesla, or his promotion to senior partner at 34. Meanwhile, I'd be assigned to folding napkins or watching over the kids while they talked real business. I didn't mind, not outwardly. I smiled, I helped, I nodded at all the right moments. But inside, I was still watching, still collecting, still filing away every moment of erasure. It's funny. People ask where writers get their material. I always say, family dinners. Thanksgiving came early that year. Not the date, just the pressure. My mother called in October with a voice 2 degrees warmer than usual, which meant she needed something. "Claire, darling," she said, drawing out the syllables like they were wrapped in cellophane. "We're having a small dinner next month, just immediate family and a few special guests. Ryan and Lena will be in town." That name again, Lena Whitmore. I'd heard it over text threads and passive-aggressive voicemails for months. "She's a gem," my mother had said. "Her family has deep roots in Shaker Heights. Her father's a surgeon. Her mother runs 2 foundations. And you know she studied at Yale, law and art history, double major." I almost asked if Lena could also walk on water, but I didn't want to waste sarcasm over voicemail. "Will you be coming?" my mother added, like it was optional. I said yes, because I always did, because part of me still craved a seat at the table, even if it was next to the dog again. When I pulled into the driveway that Thursday afternoon, the house looked the same as always. Symmetrical hedges, white shutters, porch swing nobody used. But there was a new Mercedes parked out front, and judging by the W.H. Moore license plate, it didn't belong to my dad. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I took a breath. Here we go. Inside, the house smelled like butter, rosemary, and the distant heat of family tension. The kind of warmth that invited you in and simultaneously reminded you where not to step. "Claire," my father greeted me first, opening the door with the same awkward enthusiasm he reserved for awkward business acquaintances. He looked the same: salt and pepper hair, combed to perfection, a sweater vest he probably dusted off twice a year. He hugged me in that brief way that never lingered. "Everyone's in the living room," he said. Everyone. The living room had been redecorated. Subtle things, new throw pillows, a different floral arrangement, but the seating order? Still ritualistic. My mother stood at the center like the conductor of a small orchestra, wine in hand. Ryan and Lena sat together on the couch, framed by sunlight like a Hallmark card. She looked perfect. Wavy chestnut hair, soft makeup, tailored navy dress. Understated diamonds, effortless grace. My mother caught sight of me and performed that polished, social smile I'd seen 100 times. "There you are, sweetheart. Traffic?" "Something like that," I said, brushing a snowflake from my coat. Ryan stood, genuine as always. "Hey, sis." He pulled me into a side hug. It was comforting, but laced with something else this time. Pity, maybe? "And you must be Lena," I said, turning to her. She stood gracefully and offered her hand. "Claire," she said warmly, "it's so good to finally meet you. I've heard so many things." "All good things, I hope," I replied with my practiced half-smile. "Oh, of course," she said. "Your brother talks about how brilliant you are." I blinked. That was new. My mother cleared her throat. "Let's move to the dining room. Everything's ready, and we don't want the roast to dry." The dining table was dressed like it was interviewing for a job at Better Homes and Gardens. Gold-trimmed china, polished silverware, fresh cranberry glaze in a crystal bowl. I was seated, predictably, across from the coat closet, while Ryan and Lena occupied the honored center next to my parents. I counted 5 dishes I used to love, not because they were my favorites, but because they were Ryan's. The meal began with the usual script: football, stock market updates, Lena's charity work, and, of course, Ryan's newest partnership deal at his firm. My contributions? Smiles, nods, the occasional, "that sounds great." Then came the moment that would break the evening in 2. "So, Claire," Lena said, turning to me between bites of mashed sweet potatoes, "Ryan mentioned you work in publishing. That sounds fascinating. What kind of books do you work on?" Before I could respond, my mother, true to form, cut in. "Oh, it's some little press or something. Claire's always liked books. Remember, even as a child, she used to hide in her room with a stack of novels. We used to joke she'd go blind by age 12. Everyone chuckled politely. I didn't. "It's a literary imprint now," I said, keeping my tone level. "We specialize in contemporary fiction." Lena nodded. "Do you write as well?" I hesitated. That question had teeth. "I dabble," I said. It was a lie, but safer than the truth. "You're being modest," Ryan chimed in. "She's published, you know." My mother gave a tight smile. "Self-published, dear?" "No," Ryan said slowly. "She has a real publisher, reviews and everything." The air shifted. Lena's brow lifted. "Claire, I feel like I've read something of yours. Wait, do you write under your full name?" I tilted my head. "Sometimes." My mother looked visibly uncomfortable now. She reached for the wine bottle. I just remembered something, Lena said suddenly, pulling out her phone. A book club I was in last year, Ink Between the Silence. Was that you? The fork slipped from my father's hand and clattered against his plate. All eyes turned to me. I smiled faintly. Yeah, that was me. Lena gasped. That book wrecked me. I cried for 2 days. Claire, that was... God, it was raw. My mother cleared her throat again. I didn't realize you published anything people actually read. I looked at her, long and hard. Maybe you weren't listening, I said. The silence that followed was louder than the clink of silverware or the hum of the chandelier. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to take the baked brie and fling it into the fireplace. But I didn't. I sat there, frozen in a chair I'd never been offered until now, staring across the table at the family who'd spent a decade not asking and now didn't know how to react. And then Lena did something that would change everything. She started to type. Lena, what are you doing? My mother asked, suddenly tense. I just want to be sure, Lena whispered, eyes fixed on her phone. Claire Dawson, Ink Between the Silence. Oh my God, you're on NPR's Best Debut Voices list. And wait, there's a TED Talk? Ryan leaned over, eyes wide. You have a TED Talk? I nodded, finally letting a small smile curl at the edge of my mouth. Yeah, I said softly, and no, I didn't mention it. Why the hell not? Ryan asked incredulously. My eyes found my mother's. Because you never asked. Lena's fingers were flying across her phone like she was decoding state secrets. My mother's expression tightened into something halfway between confusion and disapproval, a facial tic she reserved for moments when she wasn't in control of the narrative. My father sat stiffly, fork hovering midair, unsure whether to chew or listen. Claire Dawson, Lena said slowly, reading from her screen, author of Ink Between the Silence and Feral Grace, winner of the Penn/Bellman Prize, shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award, featured in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and the 40 Under 40 list from American Author Quarterly. Holy crap! She looked up at me, eyes wide. Claire, why didn't you say anything? Ryan, across from me, stared like he was seeing me for the first time. You're... that, Claire Dawson? Apparently so, I replied, voice dry. My mother reached across the table and snatched Lena's phone, blinking at the screen like it had personally insulted her. This has to be a different Claire Dawson, she said, her voice flat but fragile. It's a common name. Not that common, Lena said, gently reclaiming her phone. And this photo, it's her. That's Claire. She turned the screen to face the table. There I was, on a TEDx stage in a navy blue jumpsuit, speaking to a packed auditorium. Behind me was a screen that read, "The language of silence, what families don't say, but children always hear." Ryan leaned forward, visibly stunned. Why wouldn't you tell us any of this? I took a sip of my wine, then set the glass down with deliberate calm. I tried, I said, once, twice, maybe a dozen times, but after a while, it just felt like shouting into a void. My father cleared his throat. Now hold on. Claire, if you had shared this, we would have been proud. I turned to him. I did share it, Dad. Remember that winter I came home from New York, right after my book launch? I left 2 signed copies on the kitchen counter. I even included a note. Would love to see you at the reading in Columbus next week. You said you were out of town. Mom said she had bridge club. My mother narrowed her eyes. That doesn't sound like me. I leaned forward, not angry, just tired. You told me writing was a cute hobby and asked if I'd considered going back to school for nursing. Silence. Then Ryan whispered, Claire, the novel about the girl who disappears from her family's radar and builds a new identity, was that based on... He trailed off. It was fiction, I replied, but the emotion behind it, that was real. Lena sat stunned. You wrote about a girl who couldn't be seen until the world saw her first? I nodded. Because sometimes you have to become visible to strangers before your own family can see you. My father leaned back, eyes misting. I didn't realize we'd failed you like that. My mother, ever the master of redirection, began gathering plates. Well, maybe if you'd made it clearer this was important. Mom, Ryan said sharply, don't. She froze mid-reach. I just don't understand why this is coming out now, she muttered, at this dinner. Because you called me a nobody, I said. She looked up sharply, caught off guard. You said it so easily, I continued, like it was just a fact. Claire works some office job, nothing like Ryan. That's how you see me, right? I didn't mean it like that. But you did. You always have. My writing was never something to be celebrated. It was an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a thing you never knew how to brag about at church. Her lips thinned, the way they always did when she was cornered. I didn't know, Claire. You never explained. Would it have mattered, I asked, if I had screamed it into your face? If I had printed my reviews and pasted them onto your fridge? The table sat in stunned silence. Lena, God bless her, broke it. Your books have changed people's lives, she said, mine included. My mother looked down, unable or unwilling to process. It's not just about the writing, I continued. It's about the absence. You celebrated Ryan's every milestone, every birthday, every promotion, every girl he brought home. And me? I became the one you called last, the one who poured wine and watched the plates, the afterthought. Ryan spoke again, slower now. Claire, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said, because I made sure you wouldn't. It hurt less that way. There was a long pause. Then my father stood slowly. He walked over to my chair, awkwardly, like every movement was a decision, and put a hand on my shoulder. I've read your reviews, he said, tonight, on my phone, and I'm sorry it took me this long to realize you're someone to be proud of. The apology was quiet, earnest, and heavy. My mother still hadn't sat down. Elaine, my father said, voice firm in a way I rarely heard, sit. She did. Not because he commanded, but because, for once, she had nothing left to say. She looked at me across the table, hands folded. You're angry, she said. No, I replied, with surprising calm. I'm done being invisible. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There it was, the truth of 30 years, finally spoken aloud. For a long time, no one said a word. Then Ryan raised his glass. To Claire, he said, awkwardly, the somebody we should have seen sooner. Lena smiled, lifting her own. To the author. My father followed. To our daughter. My mother hesitated. Then, quietly, to your voice. I suppose it was there all along. I looked at her and said nothing, because finally, I didn't need to. The dishes sat cold on the table. No one touched the chocolate torte my mother had spent all morning baking. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla lingered in the air, clashing with the heavy silence that had settled over us like smoke. After Lena's toast and the awkward chorus of glasses clinking, we drifted into a quiet that wasn't hostile, but wasn't quite comfortable either. I stayed seated. I didn't know if I should feel triumphant or hollow. What I did feel was tired. My mother stood first, not with her usual briskness, but as if she wasn't sure what to do with her hands. She began collecting plates, one by one, with robotic precision. Leave it, my father said. She blinked at him. We'll clean later. She hesitated, then set the plates down with a clink that echoed too loudly. I'm going to get some air, she said, disappearing into the hallway. The door to the porch creaked shut behind her. Lena glanced at me, concern flickering across her face. Did I push too hard? I shook my head. You opened a door I stopped trying to knock on. Ryan sat with his hands folded, staring at the tablecloth like it had just told him something uncomfortable. Claire, he began, then paused. I feel like I've been living in a house with 2 floors, and I only ever went upstairs. I gave a soft, mirthless laugh. And I lived in the basement with the water heater and the cardboard boxes labeled Ryan's Trophies. He smiled at that, small but genuine. I didn't mean to ignore your world. I didn't see it. Because you didn't have to, I said. No one ever made you. He nodded, slowly. And that's on all of us. I didn't need an apology from Ryan. Not really. But hearing it, really hearing it, felt like unclenching a fist I hadn't realized I'd been making since I was 12. Later that evening, as the house dimmed into its quiet post-dinner lull, I found myself sitting in the den alone. A fire flickered in the fireplace, though no one had bothered to add wood. It burned low and tired, like all of us. I heard footsteps and turned, expecting Lena. It was my father. He held something in his hand, a small cardboard box, old and taped on the corners. He sat next to me without a word and placed the box on my lap. "What is this?" I asked. "Your letters," he said quietly, "the ones you mailed home." I stared at him. "I found them tonight," he said, "in the guest room closet, still sealed." A lump rose in my throat. I pulled the box open. Inside were envelopes, some thick with printed articles, others just a single sheet. I recognized my own handwriting. Carefully labeled dates, return addresses, hope wrapped in postage. "You never opened them," I whispered. He looked ashamed. "I didn't even know they were there. Your mother handles the mail." "Of course she did." He rubbed his hands together. "I read 3 of them just now. The one you sent after your first book came out, the one where you invited us to that reading, and the one from the award ceremony in Chicago. The photo of you holding the trophy, it's in here." He paused. "You looked proud, but lonely." My chest ached. "I was both," I said. He nodded, his eyes shiny. "Claire, I don't have a good excuse. I don't. But I want to try, to catch up, if you'll let me." I turned to him. "Why now?" "Because tonight, for the first time, I saw you." The fire popped softly. Something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. Ryan knocked on my door before bed. He held 2 mugs of tea, just like we used to make during high school exam weeks. It felt oddly comforting, until he handed me the one with the chipped, "World's Best Sister" mug our aunt had given me years ago, which my mother had once regifted. "I found this in the back of the cabinet," he said. "Figured it needed reclaiming." I laughed, genuinely this time. We sat on the edge of my childhood bed, the one with the faded quilt and the bookshelf still stocked with Nancy Drew and early Toni Morrison. "You know," he said, "when we were kids, I thought you had it easy." I raised an eyebrow. "No pressure, no eyes on you, no impossible expectations. I thought it must have felt like freedom." "It felt like invisibility," I replied. He nodded. "Yeah, I get that now." We sat in silence for a moment, then he added, "Do you think, is there still time for us to get to know each other as adults?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the golden boy. I saw my brother. "I'd like that," I said softly. The next morning, my mother was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was peeling apples in silence, the way she did when her mind was too loud. She didn't look up. "I read your second book last night," she said. I stopped. "The character, the mother," she continued, "she was hard to like." "She was meant to be," I replied. She set the peeler down. Her voice was tight, but quieter now. "I don't know if I was that mother." I walked over slowly. "You weren't her," I said, "but you were close enough that I didn't have to invent much." A sharp breath left her lips. Then, after a long pause, "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it," I said, "but you can stop pretending nothing was broken." She nodded, tears finally escaping down her cheek. "Will you send me your next draft?" she asked, wiping her eyes. I hesitated, then nodded. "I will." That was as much as either of us could give, and maybe, for now, it was enough. 3 months later, an envelope arrived at my apartment in Brooklyn. heavy, ivory paper, embossed return address, Whitmore and Dawson Engagement Celebration. Inside was an invitation with gold foil lettering and, at the bottom, in bold script, Claire Dawson, Guest of Honor, Reading and Remarks. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because for the first time in my life, I had been invited into something. Not as an afterthought, not as a seat filler, but as someone. The party was held in the Whitmore's backyard, more estate than lawn. Lanterns hung from pear trees, a string quartet played something classical with just enough bounce to feel festive. Rows of white chairs faced a small wooden podium beneath a silk canopy. My mother wore a slate blue dress that matched her earrings and the hydrangeas in the centerpieces. She'd spent the past month texting me about reading etiquette, tone, and outfit suggestions, which I politely ignored. What mattered was this: she had asked, and kept asking. My father greeted me at the gate with a grin and a copy of Feral Grace tucked under his arm, dog-eared and scribbled with notes. "Chapter 6 broke me," he whispered. "Same," I replied. Ryan and Lena stood near the refreshment table, radiant. When I approached, Lena hugged me so tightly I nearly dropped my binder of marked-up pages. "I still cry every time I reread your closing line," she said. "But I also laugh harder than I should when I picture your mom accidentally assigning your book to her bridge club." "She's still apologizing for that," I smirked. "Claire," Ryan said, stepping forward, "thanks for saying yes." "Thanks for meaning it," I said back. When it was time for the reading, Lena's father introduced me. But before I even spoke, something small but enormous happened. My mother reached out and gently pulled out a chair at the main table, right next to her, right where Ryan used to sit alone. She patted the cushion and smiled, tight-lipped but real. I sat, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was occupying space. I felt like I belonged in it. At the podium, I read a passage from a new novel in progress, one that followed two estranged sisters rebuilding trust through shared letters. It was quiet as I read. No clinking silverware, no distracted glances, only listening. When I finished, my mother stood first to clap. I didn't cry, but I felt something unlock deep in my chest. Not everything had been forgiven, not everything should be, but the scaffolding for something new had finally been built. And that was enough. Later, as I packed up my notes, my mother pulled me aside. "You were remarkable," she said. "I've always been," I answered. She nodded, not flinching. "I know, I'm just sorry it took me this long to see it." I squeezed her hand. "Better now than never." Her eyes softened. "Would you sign my copy?" I blinked. "You read it?" "Twice." I took the book from her purse and opened to the title page. My pen hovered. "To Mom," I wrote. "Thank you for listening, finally." She smiled. "It won't be the last time." That night, back in my apartment, I placed the signed copy of my book next to the invitation on my shelf. Beside them sat an old photograph, my 9th birthday, crooked smile, gap-toothed grin. Only now it was framed, and I was in the center, finally.
So, what about you? Have you ever felt like the invisible one, until the world finally noticed what your family didn't? Or maybe you've been on the other side, realizing too late that someone close to you was silently shining. Whatever your story, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, your feelings, or just a moment that stayed with you. Let's turn this into more than just a story. Let's make it a conversation. And hey, if this resonated with you even a little, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. I've got more stories coming. Stories that might just help someone feel seen. Thanks for sticking with me until the very end. Your time, your attention, it matters, just like your voice does.